So reading that aloud or saying it aloud, for example, for instance, is so cold. A lot of entertainment resources and entertainment news and entertainment resources and money, of course, supplies, materials, and resources, for example. And maybe the continuation of that, and a lot of laughter and giggling, comedy and jokes, and certain gestures, motions, movements, and needed necessary, usually not needed necessary, but sure helps, perhaps, for example, we're family members, FMs, and family and friends, and we're kinfolks KFs, and we're kinfolks KFs, and we're kinships KS, and kinships KS, and kinfolks KF, and kinfolks KF, and we're family members, FMs, and family members, FMs, and family and friends, and we're family and friends, FAFs, and we're family and friends, FAFs, and very important resource, money's currency, as the man individual said, paraphrase quotation, summarize, abbreviated, and flourish, prolonged audition, flourish, and bloomed and grow for about forever. And very important resource, monies, and reading it aloud and saying it aloud, and prolonged audition, flourished, and bloomed and flourishing, prolonged audition, flourishing, and different resource, monies, currencies, volumes, additions, versions, maybe about 2 out of 2, or 3 out of 3, for example, for instance, so called, simultaneously, and about the same time, different volumes, versions, and editions, books that are writing and jokes, and to be continuation of different words, sayings, and phrases, videos, and news videos, and books that are writing and jokes, and news articles, NA, and books that are writing and jokes, for example, very important resources, money's currencies, after the order of magnitude, order of resources, money's currencies, applies to the man, individual person, said, paraphrase, quotation, summarize, abbreviated, the man, individual person, said, paraphrase, quotation, summarize, abbreviated. Different order of magnitude, order of priorities, different core resources, core energy is CE, different so-called crossovers, money, supplies, materials, resources. Maybe that's enough, that's sufficient. Maybe about that, maybe not about that, maybe recommend, advise. Very important resources, money, currencies, the man, individual person said, paraphrase, quotation, summarize, abbreviated. The people, those individuals, those men, individuals, a person said, paraphrase, quotation, summarize, abbreviated. Different biometric markers, biometric markers, and we have our real DNA, genetics, genome, genotypes, haplogroups, bodies, real critical mass CM, and very implied contracts for implied agreements, and maybe so-called subject to reasonable interpretation, understandings, for example. We have our organizations, groups, militaries, government, sections, species, ethnicities, races, our dominions, our so-called empires, our so-called republics, our dominions, our empires, republics. Our democracies, our so-called democracies, our so-called clandestines, our so-called clans, our so-called errors, our so-called typos, our so-called emissions, our so-called hairs, our so-called heirs, our so-called emissions and heirs, our so-called dominions, our so-called democracies, our so-called republics, our so-called empires, and our organizations, groups, militaries, government, sections, species, ethnic races, and for example, so-called, by birth and by blood, BAB, by birth and by blood, BAB, and by birth, BB, by blood, 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 BB, by birth, by blood, BAB, by birth, by blood, BB, BAB, by birth, by blood, BAB, and our real lifetime memberships and citizenships, and we're family members, FMs, and family and friends, for example. Very excellent, fine, and good about 100% of the time. Very appropriate and safe and sound about 100% of the time. Reading this aloud, sort of continuation of different news videos, books that are writing jokes out of entertainment resources, and for example, for instance, so-called. Very important resources, monies, processes, our goals and programs, and resources, monies, laws of diminishing return. Very important time management, TM, energy management, EM, resource management, RM, money management, MM, and resource money is course, different process of eliminations, POE, and for example, and very important resources, money is currency, supplies, and who, what, wow, who, what, where, how, why, different so-called WWs and HHs and YYs, HHs and WWs, who, what, where, how, why, what, how, who, what, why, how, where. Different order of magnitudes, order of priorities of resources, monies, currency, supplies, materials, maybe completed and done. If that's sufficient, maybe if that's sufficient, that's enough. Oftentimes recommend advise if you so choose to decide. If you so choose to decide. It's very important websites, blogs, money, so-called spontaneous combustions, SC, spontaneous combustions, SC, and oftentimes nearly instantaneously, resources, monies, energy, supplies, different energy workers, resource workers, feng shui workers, research workers, and different workers, laborers, and resources, and different fellow writers, authors, photographers, and for example, for instance, so-called entertainment resources, entertainment resources, very important resources, monies, currency, supplies, materials, resources, AGs, and your different so-called scientific methods, SMs, and resources, monies, currency, supplies, sciences, medicines, biology, physiology, physics, resources, monies, currencies, computer animation, CA, and special effects, SC, and computer animation, morphing, and resources, monies, currencies, entertainment, entertainment news, and a lot of laughter and giggling, comedy, jokes, and of course, and I'm oftentimes the states and territories of the so-called world or worlds, WRLDS, or globe or globes, GLOBS or GLOB, or GLOBS or GLOB, or universes, UNIVERSES, or UNIVERSES, or UNIVERSE, universes, worlds, and globes. Reading this aloud and paraphrase quotation summarize beauty, the man, individual person said, paraphrase quotation summarize beauty. Very important gestures, motions, and movements, and a lot of laughter and giggling, comedy, jokes, bluffing and teasing and joking, for example. And for instance, so-called laughter and giggling, comedy, jokes, and bluffing and teasing and joking. Maybe about that, maybe not about that, maybe out the time, not that, but for example. And for instance, so-called, and for example. And we're family members, FMs, and family and friends, a lot of entertainment resources, amusements, and entertainment news, and resources, monies, currency, supplies, materials, and resources, age, year to year, and for example, for instance, so-called. Paraphrase quotation summarize abbreviated, the man, individual person said, paraphrase quotation summarize abbreviated. Maybe about that, maybe not about that, maybe out that time, not out time, different so-called time frames, approximate, and very sufficient, and very sufficient, and very excellent, fine and good about 100% of the time. Very excellent, fine and good about 100% of the time. Very appropriate and safe and sound about 100% of the time. Very appropriate and safe and sound about 100% of the time. And we're family members, FMs, and family members of friends. We're kinships, KS. We're kinships, KS. We're kinfolks, KFs. And we're kinships, KSs. We're family members, FMs, and family and friends. Very excellent, fine and good about 100% of the time. Very excellent, fine and good about 100% of the time. Very appropriate and safe and sound about 100% of the time. Very appropriate and safe and sound about 100% of the time. And we're family members, FMs, and family and friends, for example.